So starting out, this presentation is going to be on the equipment lending library. We're calling it a program. Really, this is it's a project. It's an ITTP funded project. It's a bit of a pilot program we're trying to build into a full-fledged program. And that'll make a little bit more sense as we go on. Again, my name is Matt Swanson. I'm from the Construction Engineering Research Laboratory. We'll start off. Most of this is going to be images. I'm going to be a lot of pictures, so I don't want to bore you, make you think there's going to be too much text up front, but I did want to go over the goal right away. So the goal of the Equipment Lending Library program is to provide energy auditing tools and training to Army installations, kind of the group here we're talking about, to help them meet the energy reduction policy requirements that they have in place. So we're going to talk a lot about the equipment that's available through the program right now, and when I talk about it being a pilot program, part of what I mean by that is there's a limited amount of equipment. We have quite a few different pieces to do a large amount of analysis, but there's not a great depth in that library. So many of the larger pieces of equipment, there's just a single item there. But it still gives us a lot of capability that we can then build on going forward. The other aspect of this, it's not just having that equipment, but also having the knowledge on how to use it, how to use the specific model and type of equipment that we're putting out. We're trying at this point to provide information on specifically how to use the equipment. Going forward, we'd like to provide not only how do you use it, but then what's the follow-on analysis that you would do in order to make use of that information. So we're going to do a pump test. Now we're going to take the results of that and look at what changes would you make with that information. What changes would you make to your facility? What could you do, and what would that cost? And kind of have some pre-formatted analysis set up ahead of time to really ease that process of doing the energy auditing, recommissioning, retrofitting activities that a lot of our installation folks either have to do themselves or see. And then finally, the lending process itself. So we'll talk a little bit about how this equipment actually gets out into the field. A little bit of background for this effort. Recently, this past summer, I was able to have the opportunity to go on a temporary developmental assignment out to the Presidio of Monterey, and they've got a great staff out there working on all of their on all the energy efforts. And one of the things they were able to do that really helped out was leverage a program that their local utility provider had going, and that was an equipment measuring tool library. And you can see kind of the web page here. This was their local utility, and this is not a common type of program that's available in a lot of places, but they are out in California. There are a lot of, additional opportunities available for some of the energy reduction out there. And so their local program is available out for all the installation staff out on Presidio of Monterey, but it's only available locally for that area, or the region that is covered by that utility provider. And the thought was, this is really a great program that led to some really powerful work that was done out there. Every year they were doing these workshops, basically, these retrocommissioning type workshops using the equipment that's made available from this program. And so we'd like to extend that type of capability to all of our Army installations. And that was some of the motivation that led to this work. So generally, we're looking at equipment that I would categorize into two groups. Here we've got kind of listed the ESA Audit backpacks, where there's one set of equipment. And generally, I would say that this applies, all of this equipment is related and can be used for walkthrough type energy audits, which is what I would generally put ESA audits into that category. Quite a few of the lower level where you can collect data. There's no long-term data logging, but a lot of instantaneous measurements. We'll come back to this in just a second. And then here's a subset. We've got more of the kind of deeper dive analysis equipment that we're going to look at here in a minute. So that's where I've put kind of an envelope around a whole other group of equipment where there's greater complexity to use it. Generally, it's more expensive. A lot of times there's logging capabilities. And you would do something like that more associated with a commissioning, retrocommissioning, recommissioning type study, a deeper level study looking at the equipment in the building. So going back over to the ESA Audit backpack, again, lower cost, instantaneous measurements can be done very quickly as you walk through the building. A lot of the stuff is relatively standard and we won't need to go over it. There are some things maybe unfamiliar. I cut out all slides. We've got kind of an overview video on the YouTube channel. We're going to talk about the channel in a little bit. But that video goes through every item that's currently available through the funding library, and so you'll have individual slides on all of these. I cut out some of this to shorten this down a bit. So just looking at some of these here, so we get the mouse back. Right up here, we've got a ballast checker. So one of the most common types of lighting we have in our federal buildings are those tube fluorescents. You see them all over the place. Relatively efficient way to do lighting in general. But we can then test if they have electronic or magnetic balance, which tells us a lot of information about whether or not they're candidates for direct replacement with LED. You wouldn't have to redo any wiring or anything else. So carrying that through can give you some information that way. We've got kind of standard equipment for cameras, taking data collection and flashlights that view in mechanical rooms that may be poorly lit. We've got a clamp meter, clamp ammeter here, so you can clamp around a wire and get an amperage. If you know the voltage there, you can calculate how much power is being consumed currently. Similarly, if we have access to regular plug, and we've got some unusual loads there, we saw this with some previous work, especially with potentially like a dental facility or medical facility, things where some of the loads aren't really known with some of the equipment. They're specialized equipment. We can very quickly potentially get instantaneous readings and even some short-term logging with that type of meter as well. We've got a 4-in-1 meter here that's, again, within the backpack, so all of this equipment comes within the single backpack, where you can get illuminance, you can get the current lighting level, airspeed if you're going to do some rough calculations with the HVAC with their air systems, infrared thermometer right next to it, mouse back, which can do a lot of things. You can get a lot of benefit very quickly, either through tracing out air and water systems, just going from kind of following the temperature drop and finding out how the system is configured. There can be a lot of piping or ductwork that can be relatively confusing, but you can pick it out very quickly using something like this, or at least it can assist with that process. It's also helpful sometimes in identifying lighting types, just by the amount of heat that's given off. We go into a little bit more information in some of the videos on that. And then a stroboscope, little stroboscope that's handheld here. You can get some quick measurements on RPM and do some calculations on that that provide you rough estimates of power usage for some of the pumps or fans. So we're going to go through the individualized equipment here on the right, going forward. So this is again for more of like a recommissioning, commissioning, recommissioning, depending on how you want to term that type of study, but a deeper dive. So these data loggers can provide an enormous amount of information. One of the most common types of analysis that is needed, they can provide enormous energy savings, is looking at the economizers. We know that economizers in buildings fail very frequently. There are a number of things that have to go right for them to operate correctly, and it's relatively straightforward to do a study and ensure that it's working correctly using a separate set of sensors, so not the sensors that are currently integrated into the building, where there may be other separate faults, but sensors that have already been recently calibrated that you can put in specific locations, collect that data, and analyze it to make sure the economizer is working correctly. Similar studies can be done for really any part of the air system and also a number of things in the water systems as well to ensure that they're not short cycling, that everything is working the way that it's intended. We've got a stroboscope here as well. There's a difference between the two, this one being significantly easier to use, but kind of larger, bulkier. It's much more expensive than the ones we have in the backpacks, but if you're doing a large number of studies on fans or pumps, you would want to make use of the higher quality, easier to use version we've got here. Combustion flue gas analyzer, you can measure the combustion for your boilers and things to make sure that we're operating at peak efficiency. We have that available as well. Hydromanometer to do pump testing. You can determine where on the pump curve that pump is currently operating, and a lot of this would have to do with balancing operations as well, and being able to check those, determine if throttling is needed or any other changes to that pump. Infrared camera can provide a lot of information, but also education. I think quite a bit of this equipment can be used both for the real measurement to collect the data and make changes to the building, but also provide a better sense for looking for things in the future, to be able to actually see heat loss either through the envelope of the building or when you're looking at ductwork or other things. I think that builds intuition for future work as well. We've got a power meter here, so we've got the ability to measure power in a number of ways. We've got the equipment that was shown for the backpacks, and then also the data loggers have some power measurement and logging capability. But here we're able to measure multiple phases and correct for the power factor, kind of a heavier duty instrument that would have to be installed, and then you could measure especially for larger loads that need to be calculated and determined for a longer period of time. This was a relatively recent addition technologically. The same group is putting out the infrared camera. They've now come out with an attachment that you can connect onto your phone. They have both iOS and Android versions. And it gives you, again, probably 80% of the capability that you get with the camera for about a tenth of the price. We've got a couple trade-offs that work that way in kind of doing the research to find what equipment we want to include for a limited budget. We were able to find some really good values when looking across and collecting equipment this way. So you can get a lot of info this way and a relatively small item to ship as well. Just a nice piece to have along with the collection. And then also a flow hood for testing flow out of the diffusers in the buildings. Again, a common kind of a tab practice to measure and validate the flow and make sure that your building is working correctly. All right, so we've got all of that equipment. I mentioned we go into greater detail, especially on the YouTube channel, where we have both specific videos for individual pieces of equipment, but also kind of overview videos for the equipment, but also for certain topics. We'll see that in just a minute as well. So this is an image of the channel itself. We've got a playlist that's been created, and the very first video is a summary video that talks about the program itself, kind of the 8-minute version of this talk, going over what the intent is, and then walking through all of the equipment, and providing a little bit more detail generally on what it's used for. And then we step through kind of video by video each piece of equipment and provide more detail. And one of the things we were able to do is incorporate some of the, the highest quality videos that are already available from some of the manufacturers. So where there was a hole in what was currently available in terms of knowledge out on kind of the YouTube community, then we were able to produce a video and put that into the playlist. We basically go through and step through all of our equipment that way and provide as much information as possible. I think in the next slide here, we can look in at kind of the playlist is on the right, and we can see the video here in the center. But we were able to add some additional information that I think will be helpful. So we've got links you can see down to the description. We're looking here at kind of the call out. So the HoboWare, this is going to be for those Hobo data loggers. The software, which is freely available to use their software to analyze any of that data. You can find that here with this link. And then similarly, cut sheets for most of the equipment can be found here as well, so that there's, again, some specific information you won't have to go search for. It's already been accumulated and collected, but here, and we've provided that level of additional information as often as possible throughout this process. And you can see kind of the video stepping through the current available equipment. Got a couple of the specific videos that were created as a part of this project. So there's a Hobo logger video here. The Hobo group in general, Onset that makes these, got a lot of good information on doing analysis with various steps of their data loggers. So this is more of an intro video to using these and also what you can use to do the analysis. So we've got the ability to do analysis on a regular laptop or desktop computer, but also on a mobile phone to be able to interface that way as well. And then as well you can see for the infrared camera and for the plant meter here. So I mentioned we've got videos that provide an overview for the program, videos specifically to each piece of equipment, but we're also trying to do something else to provide greater information, just wherever we can share some more of the information developed or possessed at the laboratory and bring that forward. Anyone who's been following this webinar series, I think maybe 2 months ago or a few weeks ago, Brian Clark was on. He was showing some especially HVAC fundamental videos that he's been working on. There's a group of us that have been trying to put this kind of information together. So similarly, we're trying to add some videos that are either task or technology specific to provide just a quick overview and as much information as possible kind of condensed down and made available. So here, this specifically was one that was made for lighting. So it talks a lot about the different fixture types, different lamp-based spaces. It's focused specifically on interior lighting, but you'll also find this video on that site. There's another that's talking about the incentive programs that are available to cover a lot of the costs of replacing that lighting. And some of the information you might want to collect or be able to compare and contrast between different. So here, this one's focused on fluorescent tubes. All of the information you might want to see on wattage, efficacy, the cost, and pin spacing. A lot of it's discussed on what it takes to actually do replacements for this as well. All right, so those are some of the videos that are available through the YouTube channel. Again, trying to build out just a greater knowledge base to kind of collectively put the availability of the equipment, the type of analysis you would do, and any information you would need to do that analysis together in one place. And so we've got some information here on how to borrow the equipment. I have to mention this process is still being developed. So we've got people that are going through it right now that are in the process of borrowing equipment, and they've gone through the process that's listed here using this A3161 form. And at this point, it's taken a little bit more time as we work through trying to develop the fastest way to get through it. So the best route is likely just to contact either Zachary or myself to get the process started, and then we'll continue to go from there. As I mentioned, we're hoping to have this really streamlined so that it's this period of time, like a 5 business days to do the shipping and scheduling, getting everything around after all the documentation has been received, will be realistic, but at this point, we're not quite there yet. And we've got some information on doing returns, and just generally that the equipment is maintained and inspected and sent for calibration from the laboratory. So everything basically is held at the laboratory until use and sent out to the installation. Installation folks are then responsible for it during the time that they have the equipment, and then they send it back at the end. We've got kind of some key takeaways related to that information. So once again, the goal to provide this energy auditing equipment and then also training. And in many ways, this has been about a year of putting this together. A lot of that had to do with collecting the equipment, developing what sets of equipment were going to be purchased, getting a hold of that, organizing it, getting it ready to be sent out, and then integrating and working through our first set of the lending out process. So a lot of the video production and building this knowledge base, I think, is really starting now. There's a little bit that's there, and it will continue to be built on going forward. The equipment in the library is available to Army installation staff, personnel. Anyone that has the need for energy auditing equipment, say specifically within this group. And then additionally, the loan duration, it can be fairly long, it can be flexible, but typically not less than a month. And part of that has to do with just the handling of the equipment. Some of it is, generally we're not talking about enormously expensive equipment. There is time requirement for handling it, for testing, for recalibrating, and so we try to minimize kind of turnover that way. Plus, we don't want to make this too short to add additional constraints on anyone using it on the installation. Right. The equipment borrower is responsible. I think that's fairly commonplace at this point for equipment in general when it's in government use. So you are responsible for the equipment. Like other situations, if something goes wrong, and then there are ways to deal with that situation, but you are responsible for it while it's signed out and then terminated. And if you want to get to the YouTube site, so we can send a link, but it's also, and I think that will be made available along with this presentation, it's also relatively easy to just Google the name here. So Energy Auditing Resource is the name of the YouTube channel. It's meant to house the equipment lending library information and then additional energy auditing resource knowledge as we go forward and try to continue developing the channel. We've always got our eye for some future development. There's a number of things here that I wanted to mention. One of them is growing the library itself. I mentioned this is more or less like a pilot project. There's a relatively small amount or depth to the equipment, a large breadth. We can cover a large amount of capabilities for doing testing, but not a huge depth in that equipment library. Secondarily, we need to determine a good method for ongoing support. There's quite a few things that are being passed around. So this first year, lending out the equipment, there's no cost, it's just lent out and made freely available for the duration of that time. Obviously, it's not something the laboratory can do indefinitely, so there are a number of plans and conversations involved into basically how that can be sustainable going forward. And anyone that wanted to talk about that more afterwards, I'd be happy to talk about it. I don't want to spend too much time here. Also, adding some specific analysis-specific walkthroughs. So there are a number of these. I think this is really going to be where the power would be to have both the specific equipment right down to the model that's being used to do a type of analysis that could be used at training events. That would have information here, the equipment itself is available, and then having videos that walk you all the way through doing the test and then doing analysis on the results from that test and what does that show you for any changes that you need to make. And so one of those is the hydromanometer, doing pump tests using a hydromanometer. Some of that work has already started. We've got basically the development for that video for use of the equipment has been completed, but the analysis piece has to be added on, and all of that obviously takes time. Economizer testing, again, I mentioned one of the biggest ones where we often see large amounts of potential energy savings. When something goes wrong with an economizer, often it's, I guess I would say it's going very wrong, where there's a large savings potential. And if the testing is relatively straightforward and we can really automate as much of that as possible using kind of pre-formatted spreadsheets or other tools, I think that would be very helpful for Army personnel in general. Next, we've got adding HVAC auditing, commissioning, as many of these kind of in the energy, water kind of sustainability region in general, the fundamentals videos to the channel. I mentioned, and we've already seen, that Brian Clark is working hard on the HVAC fundamentals videos. I think there are a couple other segments. There's been a big push towards what has been called whole building commissioning. And basically that adds in a few additional topics, some of the key ones being renewable integration and lighting. So that's some of the reasons that it's kind of what's motivated the other work that's going into these fundamental videos, with the emphasis being this isn't necessarily a shot at an exhaustive work, but something that's going to quickly bring someone up to speed, provide common language and common knowledge in a short period of time. So it's not an overwhelming amount of a commitment to watch a relatively short video like this and come up to speed very quickly. And finally, development or adoption of a standard USACE audit data collection sheet and guidance document. So this is, I guess, very personal to myself. I think there's been quite a bit of work that's been done here. I think even people on the phone know about some of this work that's been done. From our perspective, it'd be great to have this guidance document available and the data collection sheet. And if we could then help to propagate that information and then show the analysis that would back up the type of work that's being done there, I think that could really be a great synergy as well. And so that's some of the future development we're thinking about. And that really wraps up kind of the overview for this project, for this program, and we can take any questions.
Yes, I think this is Eric. To manage the questions rather than trying to use audio, we can use the chat box in the lower right, and I believe Hope Evans is already is asking about one. So please, everyone, enter your questions in the chat box in the lower right in the corner of the screen. If If you don't see it, then look at the top for a button that says chat in the top menu and click that button and it should pop up. So basically, type in your questions on there, and for the sake of the recording, I will read them aloud so that Matt can answer them. So are USACE districts, in addition to installations, allowed to check out this equipment as needed for commissioning processes?
So that's a great question, and the best answer at this time is I'm not 100% sure. We actually just dealt with part of this issue. The equipment is geared towards installations, and we have the capability to loan it out, being the laboratory. But this project is funded by the ITTP program, and I think that we need to check back with them in terms of intent and any other desire for where the equipment can be used. So that's the short answer.
Okay. Is there a fee charged?
At this point, during this first year, there has been no fee. The program has been covered by the ITTP program.
Mm-hmm. And does that include shipping?
Going forward, we don't have. Yes, even shipping has been covered.
Oh, okay.
Going forward, we're trying to develop that, and I believe we'll have conversations before too long to try to get that nailed down. There are a number of options available in terms of either allowing a small fee to cover some of these things from installations. We're trying to get away from that, partially just from the inconvenience and the barrier it provides. So we're looking to other options to try to cover those relatively minimal costs. So far, even most of this year, we've minimized a lot of the handling costs by using research assistants to kind of cut those down, to cut down on the labor of having full-time employees that are at higher labor rates handle too much of that. And it really makes it so we don't have particularly high costs, but there's always going to be something there.
Okay. How long can the equipment be checked out for?
At this point, kind of a rough number has been 6 months. I think we could go up to a year without any real issue. The biggest constraint right now is that it's such a small program, or there's not much depth. So if someone takes our single hydromanometer at this point, then it's gone until they return it. That may very soon be alleviated if we can, increase the size of the equipment library. But at this point, that would be the limiting factor. We would try to work with borrowing out the equipment. Backpacks can be taken much longer. We actually have quite a few of them. But the larger pieces of equipment, we really just try to work with the installation to try to set a timeline so that others can use it.
Okay, and would CERL come out with the equipment if the installation wanted to have CERL do the audit?
That certainly can be arranged. I think it may be obvious, but I'll state it anyway. There would be a cost associated with having CERL come out. CERL has been a part of that type of work in the past, both training events and going on site to do specialty work as well. But it isn't, I guess, currently just provided the way that the equipment is. The idea and the goal is that some of the structures as well will be there as a reach-back resource for the use of some of this equipment that they specialize in, that we would kind of keep both the equipment that's used to do this coupled with a knowledge center to be able to provide additional background and when questions arise, because I think as many of us know, when you're doing this, there's the first level of understanding of using the end. You can solve many of the problems, many of the issues you come to see. Maybe 80% of them, it's relatively simple. You use the equipment the way it was meant, and you get an answer, and it's solvable. And then there are other times where it just becomes more confusing. You collect data, and there's something wrong, and you still don't understand why. And hopefully that there are others there for reach back to help us. And so that's part of the idea with having the laboratory involved in this program.
Mm-hmm. In addition to those videos that you showed earlier, what other training opportunities might there be to use the equipment?
We have done training events in the past, and we're hopeful that we'll be able to continue to do that and organize those. So for City of Monterey, I mentioned, has done a lot of work where they've done annual events and invited energy managers and other energy-related staff out at that time, and they've used primarily PG&E equipment to do a lot of the work. We've been in talks with them and with some others about potentially doing the same type of event, but using now Army equipment and kind of making it a little bit more continuous, going from keeping that expertise. Some of the expertise as well was coming in from a contracted side, coming in from PG&E and from other contractors providing the training. That capability exists within the Army, so we would like to continue to do those.
Could that lead to maybe in the future a prospect course or something like that that could be conducted in installation?
It could. So currently, and I'm trying not to, I see a great connection here between them, but there are separate, I guess, there are separate concerns among these groups as well. I'm directly working with the HVAC commissioning prospect course, just as a separate effort, and I obviously see great synergies between the use of the same equipment at these prospect courses, and then having the ability to use that equipment and to be able to have it loaned out as a part of this program, and then have videos that reach back for when you forget how to use something specifically. I think that could provide an amazing resource for many of our installations. Sides of the house, so to speak, that control those things, and so some of that has to be handled carefully. But that is certainly of interest to me as well.
Okay. Has CERL provided audits for other government agencies like EPA or FAA?
At this point, the equipment is not intended for those groups. I don't know if, since it's entirely been, the funding has come from ITTP. My understanding is that the interest and the emphasis is for funding this work that's happening on Army installations. I would love to see it grow to be a larger program that could be further reaching like that. I don't know what the future will hold. I think this is a great potential program for the DoD in general, but as of now, it's Army specific, installation specific.
We would want them to pay for probably for the use of the equipment.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I think that's the biggest issue.
Okay. Patricia Donahue noted that we are working on developing a energy audit guide and participating in the new ASHRAE guidance that will eventually be developing training related to that. Whether or not with the prospect course or with the train the trainer kind of strategy that they use for sustainability. Someone asked if the slides from the webinar would be available, including the contact information, which I think you had on one of the previous slides. I believe so that would be on the Mercy site, along with the video and such. I think we have those posted there. This is a little bit different interface where we don't have that download button like we did on the DCS, but we can make sure that you get to them. You can send that S_E webinar email address a message saying that you'd like the slides, and we can email them to you if we don't have a way to post them online. Okay, so are there any more questions? I don't see any more questions coming in. But with that, if there are no more questions, as a reminder, you can go to the Mercy site, the mrsi.erdc.bren.mil/sustain, download the quiz, send it with your answers to s_e webinar@usace.army.mil for the CEUs. With that, I will stop the recording, and we will tell everyone to have a nice day.
I'd like to add one last thing, just generally, I guess, as a call. I see great interest or great potential and a need for this type of program. I think that there's so much that could be done. If there's anyone else who has interest or any knowledge or anything to try to continue to promote or provide this type of value for installations, feel free to contact me. Again, Matt Swanson, I'm in the global. I'd be very interested in trying to push this capability forward and out to more installations as well.
All right. Okay. Well, Matt, thank you very much. Everyone else as well, have a nice afternoon. At least here in DC, it looks like it's beautiful weather outside. And so until next time, have a nice day.